Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here today to present AB 808, the Protection of IDD Survivors of Rape Act. Protecting members of the IDD community, particularly children, is very personal to me. That is why it breaks my heart that children with disabilities in this country are being targeted and are disproportionately the victims of rape. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, disabled people are 4 times more likely than non-disabled people to be victims of rape. According to the Verna Institute of Justice study, disabled children are a shockingly 4.6 times more likely to be sexually abused as children than their peers. Members, this is a crisis, but we can do something about it. AB 808 will increase the punishment for those convicted of the rape of disabled children from a minimum of 3 years to a minimum of 7 years for those ages 14 to 17 and 9 years for those ages 11 to 13. I have 4 main arguments for AB 808. Each of them is alone sufficient for an aye vote. First, according to the U.S. Department of Justice, blacks, Hispanics, and females with disabilities are disproportionately the victims of violent crimes, including sexual assault and rape. For females with disabilities, the rate of violent victimization was 49.4 per 1,000 compared to 11.3 per 1,000 for females without disabilities. For blacks, Hispanics, and persons of other races, the rate of violent victimization for persons with disabilities was at the least triple that of persons without disabilities. This bill protects some of our most marginalized, particularly minority children with disabilities, from heinous crimes. AB 808 furthers equity. Second, the minimum of 3 years imprisonment for the rape of a disabled child is insufficient retribution. This bill poses a simple question that must be answered. Is 3 years imprisonment for the rape of a disabled child as young as 11 years of age sufficient punishment? Rape of disabled children is one of the most disgusting crimes imaginable, but a no vote says a small punishment is good enough. Let's compare this to another law. The maximum sentence of stealing a car is 3 years, which is the same as the minimum sentence for raping a disabled child. That means currently, the law sees some instances that the rape of a child with disabilities is morally equivalent to stealing a car. Think about that. We cannot honestly believe that inflicting immeasurable trauma upon a defenseless child is morally equivalent to stealing a car. We know that the punishment for grand theft isn't too high, so the punishment for rape of a child with disabilities is clearly too low. Thirdly, there's evidence that increased sentences for rape and sexual assault can deter crime. According to the British Journal of Criminology, found in the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs Library, the deterrent effect of longer sentences is strongest for rape and assault. Evidence suggests that criminals respond to incentives and stronger sanctions to deter crime. We know that we must reduce the rates of rape against children with disabilities. Credible studies indicate that this bill will help achieve it. Fourthly, convicted sex offenders, including those who prey on children, are disproportionately likely to reoffend and do it often and quickly. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, released sex offenders were more than 3 times more likely to commit additional acts of rape and sexual assault compared to other released prisoners. Research published in the Journal of Law and Human Behavior additionally found that over 30% of children molesters studied committed new sexual offenses, with an average time between offenses being only 3.6 years. Let me remind you that sentences can be as low as only 3 years, meaning that another child is likely to be raped less than a year after the rapist is released. This bill will keep serial rapists off the streets. I'd like to make one final point, if I may. It concerns fairness and equity both in this committee and under California law. On March 14th, this committee unanimously passed AB 484, the sentencing enhancement for white-collar crimes by our colleague, Assemblymember Gabriel. The rationale my colleague gave to earn this committee's unanimous approval that the perpetrators are preying on some of the most vulnerable communities. Nobody is more vulnerable than a disabled child. If the non-marginal crime victims who are the focus of Assemblymember Gabriel's bill are worthy of our protection, then so are the disabled children who are the focus of my bill. This vote will send a message to Californians about who is truly valuable by this committee and protected by our laws. All of us agree that the victimization of children with disabilities is a problem, and I have presented 4 rational reasons why the solution I've put forth will rectify this crisis. Members, I respectfully ask for an aye vote. At this time, I'd like to introduce Angela Hayes of the San Joaquin County District Attorney's Office to add her perspective.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair and members of the committee. I am Angela Hayes with the San Joaquin County District Attorney's Office, and I'm currently the supervising Deputy District Attorney for the Child Abuse Sexual Assault Unit. I'm here to support AB 808 simply because it creates parity where it currently does not exist. Non-developmentally disabled children, all minors, and perpetrators who commit rape against those minors are subject to heightened punishment already in Penal Code 264, as long as they use violence, force, duress, fear, or menace. With a developmentally disabled child, they do not have the same lens as their counterparts to view the world. They are more trusting of adults, and an adult perpetrator would not need to use the same level of force or menace. They simply get the child to acquiesce through trickery. And should we reward those perpetrators and have those children fall through the cracks and not be on par with the other minors that are already currently protected by this exact same heightened level of punishment for those perpetrators? I don't believe that we should reward perpetrators. They should all be treated the same, particularly those that would prey on the most vulnerable. Those perpetrators don't have to use the force or violence to cajole their victims into performing these sex acts. They simply can, with a developmentally disabled minor, convince them that this is something they may want, that it may be good for them, that they should participate in this behavior. And I cannot think that anyone would reward that behavior. We simply are asking for parity among all children victims, whether they are raped by an adult, having sex against their will through force, fear, menace, violence, or some other trickery that an adult can use on a trusting, vulnerable, developmentally disabled child who does not know to what they are acquiescing. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other witnesses in support?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Corey Salzillo on behalf of the California State Sheriff's Association support. Thank you.
Kim Stone, Stone Advocacy on behalf of the California District Attorneys Association in support.
Thank you. Are there any witnesses in opposition?
Commissioners. Good morning.
Good morning.
Margot George on behalf of the California Public Defenders Association in opposition to AB 808. We certainly agree that rape of any child or anyone is, a horrible offense. But this bill is unnecessary. Rape of a child is already punished harshly. The author talked about the minimum being 3 years. In fact, without any other circumstances, it's up to 8 years. And under 667.6 J1 and 2, depending on the facts of the case, the punishment would be life without parole or 25 years to life. And we have seen repeatedly in the studies that longer and harsher sentences do not deter crime, but result in mass incarceration. As early as 2014, the Little Hoover Commission addressed the disconnect between science and sentencing and said that putting away offenders for increasingly longer periods of time with no evidence that lengthy incarceration brings any public benefit. And then we look again at the cost of incarceration. It cost, according to the Legislative Analyst Office, over $106,000 a year. And that is money that instead of putting people in prison for longer and longer periods of time should be used to provide benefits for the community, benefits for the victims, benefits that aren't out there, counseling, housing, education. We need to change this rape culture and not just see only punishing people more and more as a solution to our problems. So we respectfully ask for a no vote on AB 808. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members. Carmen Nicole Cox again, Director of Government Affairs for ACLU Cal Action, and also here in respectful opposition to the policy approach of AB 808. There is no disagreement that rape of a child, particularly a developmentally disabled child, is dreadful, and that's why there's already a criminal statutory scheme to punish that conduct. However, this bill takes the wrong policy approach because our investments should actually be to hold victims, to hold them carefully and to hold them compassionately. AB 808 is, I'm sure also undeniably, an emotional expression of the outrage that all of society feels when a child is sexually assaulted. This is especially true because, but again, it takes the wrong approach. This is especially true because the increased penalties suggested by AB 808 or recommended by AB 808 are mandatory. They leave no room for the prosecutor or a judge's discretion to impose a punishment that is reflective of individual culpability. That individualized consideration is necessary because while we heard discussion about adults engaging in this conduct, what we know is that the person who causes the harm may well be a minor and could be a minor with developmental disabilities of their own, and also could be a minor suffering from, who has experienced trauma from sexual assault. So to remove the ability to engage in an individualized consideration is inappropriate. What would be appropriate would be an evidence-based policy approach that, for example, could involve more visibility of and funding for trauma recovery centers. So instead, as my colleague mentions, AB 808 monopolizing funds for further punishment, we could, for example, focus on trauma-informed clinical case management, evidence-based individual group and family psychotherapy, and this is for the survivors, for the victims, crisis intervention, medication management, legal advocacy and assistance, helping survivors file police reports and access victim compensation funds. For these reasons, we at ACLU Cal Action believe that AB 808's proposed use of taxpayer dollars takes the wrong policy approach. And we ask for your no vote.
Thank you. Are there any others in opposition? Any others in opposition? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to committee members for any comments or Mr. Lackey. Oh,
Hi,
I'm sorry, I didn't see. Go ahead.
my name is Angela Chan, San Francisco Public Defender's Office. We oppose. Thank you.
I believe it's your turn now, Mr. Lackey.
Thank you. Wow. This is clearly a discussion that describes an unusually cruel act. And quite frankly, it's a unique level of evil. And I do believe that penalties should reflect the egregious nature of the actions, not only against the victim, but against our entire society. There were some comments made by the opposition about needing a study. I can just tell you that, to me, why in the world would we think that we need some kind of validation to affirm the fact that there's a moral equivalence to stealing a car and any level of an affront against a victim, a sexual assault against a developmentally disabled? That moral equivalence is so out of balance, completely objectionable. I don't care under any circumstance. And to not think that that needs some repair is an affront to society. I just hope we're not slipping to that point. I mean, Lady Justice asks for a balance when we think against the accused and the aggrieved. And this is so out of balance. And I thank you for bringing this forward because it shows the inequity. We talk about equity all the time in this body, and it's an important goal that we seek. There's no equity in this penalty in consideration to the level of evil that is demonstrated by this action. And I hope that we would show that emotional outrage that was expressed by the opponents. It needs some penalty validation, and your bill does exactly that. So I thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you.
For the author, this was to raise the minimum? Is that
Correct.
what you're asking? Okay. For the public defender's side, you were mentioning the 8 years and up to 25 to life. Were you trying to make a point with that being the minimum, or you were explaining the maximum?
No. Life without parole and 25 to life are, if there's certain circumstances in aggravation, those are the sentencing range under 667 point, I forgot, but it's the basically one strike sentencing.
Okay, but were you, because I think we're trying to raise the minimum here, and that's what his point is, and I think you were trying to make it look like the minimum was 8 years or 25 to life is what I was getting.
No. If I said that, I misspoke.
Okay.
I was talking about the maximum. And of course, judges use their discretion to look at the circumstances of each offense and the power dynamics between the defendant and the victim when they impose sentencing.
Okay, thank you. Author, do you have anything for that?
Yes. In that instance, it applies to the 25. The 25 to life applies to 10-year-olds and lower. But what we're talking about specifically in AB 808 is these children with disabilities. As mentioned, they don't quite understand. So this isn't a forced physical, this is trickery. This is the methods that are being used here are different, and it doesn't quite apply the same as what's being mentioned by the other side. They're looking at this is the violent beating of children versus using these trickery methods and tricking these children with disabilities. And we're trying to focus on children with disabilities here because they don't know, they don't have the cognitive ability to understand that. And I think it's important that we truly look at that.
Thank you. And so the other thing I want to bring up is we're talking about the scheme of, or this scheme of how we do our sentencing, and then we turn it to the victims and getting them the help that they need. And I don't think that's what this bill is talking about. We're talking about the offender itself. So that's what we need to look at here. And also something that was brought up was we're saving, or it costs $106,000 a year, I believe is what you said, as far as incarcerating somebody. And then later on, you talked about how we need to find ways to use that money to benefit the community and the victims. Well, I think $106,000 a year is benefiting the community and the victim by having them put away. I was a crimes against children's detective, as I've mentioned many times before, and seeing these kinds of crimes and seeing that, as you brought up in this bill, and thank you for bringing this bill up, that we don't value our children or disabled children as much as we say we do. Otherwise, we would be raising the minimum on this. And it sickens me that you brought up the point that stealing a car it gets more of a penalty than it does of taking advantage of our disabled and by raping them as well. So I will definitely be an eye on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Ortega?
First of all, as a mother, I completely appreciate what you're bringing forward today. I agree that this kind of crime is evil. But I do have a question. You mentioned children with disability in the immigrant community. Have you met with the immigrant communities in your district? And what is their position on this bill?
Ma'am, I support immigrant communities. I actually spend quite a bit of time. My district is a voter rights action seat that I won by 63.2%. Where I grew up, I was Devon Matias from Eastside Poros. The immigrant community are my friends, my neighbors, my family. I know them well, and they support this. They're sick and tired of being preyed upon and our laws not being enough to do justice.
Interesting, because I did just meet with a group of immigrants that live in your district who are living in fear of being kicked out of their homes, and mentioned to me that they attempted to meet with your office several times, but were never able to even speak to you.
Well,
So
we got
I
partisan
just-
groups
I-
all over the place.
Excuse me, I'm
so
talking.
That's
I
clearly.
respectfully ask for my ability to ask you questions
Okay.
and for you to give me the respect and response. So I wasn't finished. I met with them, and they live in fear every day. So if we want to address evil, I just want to make sure that you are meeting with those communities that came to me. These children came to me and spoke about living in fear and not being able to meet with their representative. So I'm hoping that moving forward, you will be having these conversations. I'm happy to share who the group is and happy to be part of that conversation if you would like to move forward.
Absolutely. And in response to that, it's a completely different topic, members. Conversations about housing.
let's
no,
stay on-
Mr. Chair, please. To be
Mr.
accused of not talking to my constituents on a housing issue versus a rape issue are completely different. I don't appreciate that.
Okay. Any other comments? You may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, it's brought up about these studies, and the Little Hoover Institute study was brought up, but I think, again, the Verna Institute study about disabled children, this shows a 4.6 times that these children are more likely to be sexually abused than their peers. The study is titled, "How Safe Are Americans with Disabilities?" This is a study we should be paying attention to more than a Little Hoover Institute study. Another study, and what this bill gets to, as I mentioned in point 3, there's evidence that increased sentences for rape and sexual assault can detour crime. And this is from the Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs Library. And again, it states, members, The deterrent effect of longer sentences is the strongest form rape and assault. Evidence suggests that criminals respond to incentives and stronger sanctions to deter crime. Now, this is from the Department of Justice versus a Little Hoover Institute study. The fact is, it is a deterrent. We're going to talk about conversations about saving money and bettering our communities. This is a deterrent, members. This is how we get these heinous people to curb their behavior. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you. We were talking about the rape of children with disabilities, members. There are a few more heinous crimes. We know we must do something to protect them. I put forth a bill that is supported by our regional centers who support our children with disabilities, crime victims groups, law enforcement, and prosecutors who deal with these cases every single day. This bill is supported by the data and research. It furthers equity and ensures safety for our most marginalized and vulnerable children, children with disabilities. Members, I ask that you protect disabled children who are the victims of rape, and I ask you for your support in your aye vote. Thank you.
Motion? Second. So I'm gonna try this one more time. We're only in our second one, but I'm gonna try it. Let's see if we can take this down. And your outrage at this crime is justified. I'm letting you know that now. And even the disability rights have pushed for reporting and investigation, as well as prevention programs directed at the root causes of these offenses. So I believe we're on board with getting to the root causes of this so we can stop it. I can almost guarantee nobody on this committee disagrees with you that these are heinous acts, probably on par even with elderly abuse, of people who cognitively may not know what they're doing. I think there's a philosophical disagreement on how we move forward. I think we can get to something. I think we can get there. But first, I probably need to get all sides to kind of take it down so we can look at this objectively and come up with some solutions that will ultimately help the disabled community. As someone who has a relative who's physically challenged, I know their challenges, and I know how this society treats them, and it's difficult. And so we need to provide them all the protections that we can to make sure that that this doesn't happen over and over again. And I'd like to see some studies, but most important, when we talk about studies, there's a discussion about whether or not judges are given 3 years versus life without the possibility of parole. I would like to get that kind of data for me, just so that we can make an informed decision. And if judges are actually going after these criminals, these heinous criminals, in an effective way, because I think that's part of the discussion. Are the laws on the books already? That's handling it, that's taking care of it, and so that's where I think that's where the line of disagreement is, and I can see where the DA's office is. So what I will offer, if it doesn't make it out of this committee, that I will work with you. I will work with you. I will work with the disability rights community, and even work with the opposition, so that we can do whatever we can to end this scourge on California. It's not in one segment of the population. It is a scourge for all of us. period. And that we do something quickly. So with that, let's take a vote.
On AB 808 by Assemblymember Mathis, the motion is due pass to the Appropriations Committee. Jones Sawyer.
Not voting.
Jones Sawyer not voting. Alanis. Alanis, aye. Bonta.
No.
Bonta, no. Jackson. Lackey. Lackey, aye. Ortega. Ortega not voting. Santiago. Zabur.
That bill's on call. As soon as we get the prerequisite members. The only thing I would add, if it doesn't make it out of this committee, are you asking for reconsideration?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. And I'll leave this study here for you.
Okay. And then hopefully with the members here and the members coming in, I can take it by acclamation.
Thank you, Mr.
Unanimous
Chairman
consent.
and members.